I speak to you today with feelings of profound sorrow.
The coronation banquet was meant to be a night of unity, gold, and royal certainty. But in one silent second, everything changed. King Charles looked across the room, saw Camilla wearing the Queen's orb, and the celebration froze. Forks stopped. Conversations died. The monarch's face hardened, and what should have been a royal triumph became a public rupture no one inside the palace could ignore. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles did not react like a wounded husband at first. He reacted like a king who had seen the sacred line crossed. The coronation banquet, the grand meal held to mark unity and loyalty, had been arranged as the final seal on a day of power. Royals sat under strict order. Courtiers watched every movement. Guests knew nothing inside that room was casual. Camilla's smile faded when she realized he had noticed. The Queen's orb, a ceremonial object representing royal authority and sacred continuity, was never meant to become personal adornment. It belonged to the monarchy itself, not to one person's wish to be seen. The Queen consort touched it as if touch alone could explain her choice, but the king's eyes hardened. William saw the change before anyone else did. The prince looked from his father to her, and his silence said what no courtier dared say. Charles placed his glass down. The sound was small, but the effect was brutal. He pushed back his chair, stood with terrifying calm, and ordered the banquet paused before the toast. He did not shout. He did not plead. He spoke with the cold control of a monarch, deciding the room would not move until truth was faced. Camilla stared at him, wounded. An aide stepped toward Camilla, ready to cover the moment, soften the embarrassment, perhaps remove the orb before guests understood. Charles lifted one hand, and the aide stopped. That gesture turned discomfort into fear. It told the room there would be no quiet correction, no polite escape, no private cleanup. The king wanted answers in the silence he had created. The banquet no longer felt like celebration. It felt like judgment. Camilla understood this was not being treated as a fashion mistake. William understood it was larger than one evening. Charles understood it most of all. Someone had challenged royal boundaries, and before another word was spoken, the crown demanded to know why. But to understand why one piece of royal symbolism could break the evening apart, the story must move from the banquet table to the people whose futures were suddenly on the line. Behind the halted banquet stood four people trapped in the same moment for completely different reasons. Charles saw a breach of sacred duty. Camilla saw humiliation closing in around her. William saw a warning about the monarchy's future. Catherine saw the pain behind the protocol. And in that frozen room, every look carried history, loyalty, resentment, and fear. Charles had spent years trying to keep the monarchy steady. And now one object threatened to undo that control in front of everyone. The crown, meaning the royal institution itself, and the authority attached to it, depended on order, symbols, and trust. The king knew the banquet was not only a dinner, it was proof that his reign could still command respect after years of private wounds and public storms. Camilla felt the room turning against her before anyone spoke. The queen consort had fought for acceptance for so long that the queen's orb no longer looked like only a ceremonial object in that moment. To her, it looked like recognition. It looked like belonging. It looked like a sign that she was not standing outside history anymore. But Charles saw something very different. He saw a sacred symbol pulled too close to personal ambition. William leaned toward Catherine and spoke in a low voice. The prince did not need many words because his face carried the warning. This had crossed a line. Catherine stayed still, but she understood him. She could see Camilla's hand move toward the orb as if the queen consort wanted to protect it, defend it, or explain it without speaking. The princess also saw Charles changing in front of them. His hurt was personal, but his response was royal. Charles felt the deepest part of his reign being touched. The orb connected to legitimacy, duty, and the memory of the queen who had carried the monarchy before him. That memory made the moment sharper. Camilla knew it too, and that knowledge made her exposure worse. Guests stared. Courtiers held their breath. William watched his father with growing concern, while Catherine watched Camilla with quiet sadness. Then the king asked the question no one wanted to hear. Who approved it? His voice did not rise, but the room tightened around the words. Camilla looked at him, but no answer came from her lips. William turned slightly. Catherine followed his gaze, and from behind the queen consort, someone shifted, as if the secret had finally found a body. That single interruption opened the door to a hidden backstory, one that began long before the banquet and had been waiting for one dangerous mistake to surface. The banquet did not explode from nowhere. Its first spark came weeks earlier, behind closed doors, during a private rehearsal inside the palace jewel chamber. What happened there was small enough to hide, but serious enough to haunt every person who witnessed it. Camilla asked one question about the queen's orb, and from that moment, the path to disaster was already being written. Camilla wanted the symbol closer, and that request changed the air around her. The orb placement review was a private check of royal objects before the banquet, made to decide which ceremonial pieces could appear and where they would stand. The queen's orb, a sacred object tied to royal authority, was supposed to remain part of the crown's display, not be drawn toward one person's seat. Two aides heard the request and looked at each other because they understood the danger. Charles was not in the room when the question was first asked. That absence mattered, because no one there had the full courage to answer with the force of the monarch himself. Camilla asked whether the orb could be shown closer to the queen consort's place, and the phrase sounded simple, almost harmless. But the queen consort heard the hesitation that followed. She felt it like a quiet insult. To her, that pause meant she was still being measured, still being doubted, still being kept at the edge of royal acceptance. William later heard about the request, and the prince felt an alarm he could not ignore. Catherine listened as he explained it, and she understood why his voice had gone low. Royal symbols mattered, because they told the public where power lived. They mattered because one misplaced object could say more than a speech. The princess warned him that if the orb appeared too close to Camilla, people would not see decoration. They would see a claim. Camilla carried her hurt into a private conversation with Sophie. The queen consort told the trusted confidant she was tired of being treated as if her place was conditional. Sophie did not attack her, but she did not fully comfort her either. The trusted confidant understood the pain, yet she also understood the danger. Recognition could be given. It could not be taken from the crown's most sacred symbols. Then a courtier found the note. A revised banquet placement note, meaning the written guide used by staff to arrange objects and seating, suggested the orb would be visibly associated with Camilla's seat. No final royal approval appeared on it. No clear command from Charles. No signature strong enough to carry the weight of that change. And still, the note moved forward. The point of no return came when that revised instruction reached the final banquet team. Someone should have stopped it. Someone should have questioned it. But no one dared challenge the wording before the doors opened. By the time Charles saw the orb at the banquet, he was not discovering a mistake, he was confronting the result of a warning that had been ignored. The room waited for Charles to soften. He did not. Camilla waited for someone to explain. No one moved. Then the king stepped away from the table and walked toward her, every footstep carrying the weight of the crown. The confrontation was not loud at first, but it was devastating, because everyone understood that Charles was no longer asking as a husband. Charles stopped close enough for Camilla to hear the pain under his control. The banquet stayed frozen behind him, with guests trapped in silence and courtiers afraid to breathe too loudly. The queen's orb, the sacred royal object that stands for the monarch's authority, had become the center of the room. That mattered because the crown depends on trust. If one symbol could be moved without clear command, then order itself looked weak. Camilla whispered that she had not meant disrespect. Her voice was low, almost broken, but the king's face did not soften. He heard the words, yet they arrived after the damage had already been done. The queen consort looked humiliated, but Charles looked wounded. He was not only seeing his wife in trouble, he was seeing the monarchy being pulled into a private need for recognition. William stood behind his father, tense and silent. The prince did not interrupt, but his presence made the moment heavier. Catherine watched Camilla with controlled sadness, not victory, because the princess understood how public shame could cut deeper than anger. Still, Catherine also understood why Charles could not step back. The banquet was meant to prove royal unity. Instead, it had exposed a crack everyone could see. Charles asked the question again. Who gave permission? Camilla looked at him, and her hesitation became more damaging than any confession. The king waited. William's eyes moved toward the staff near the wall. Catherine noticed the same movement, and the silence began to point toward something larger than the queen consort herself. Then the private secretary stepped forward. He admitted that a revised ceremonial note had circulated before the banquet. A ceremonial note means written instructions used by palace staff to control royal objects, seating, and order during major events. That explanation changed everything. Charles turned away from Camilla and looked toward the people who managed the room around her. The hurt in his face became something colder. Camilla seemed to shrink under the weight of that admission. She had carried the orb as if it proved belonging, but now it looked like proof that authority had been moved without the king's final command. William understood the danger at once. Catherine understood it too. This was no longer only a painful exchange between husband and wife. It was palace control, and power inside the palace always leaves fingerprints. Once the orb was removed, the real battle began. Charles did not simply want the symbol taken away. He wanted to know how it reached Camilla in the first place, who approved the placement, and why no one stopped it. In the corner of the banquet hall, one aide lowered his eyes, and William knew the answer would wound more than one person. Charles ordered the staff to remain close. The palace worked through protocol, approvals, and ceremonial notes, meaning formal rules and written instructions that guide every royal movement during major events. That mattered, because the queen's orb could not drift near Camilla by chance. The king understood this was not a misplaced object. It was a choice that had passed through hands, desks, and silence. Camilla sat apart after the orb was taken. The queen consort kept her shoulders stiff, trying to look composed while shame gathered around her. She had wanted recognition, but now the room treated her like the center of a breach. Her face carried the pain of someone who had reached for belonging and found accusation instead. Still, Charles did not rush to comfort her. The monarch had moved into duty, and duty had made him cold. William followed his father into a side chamber, and the prince watched him read the revised note. Charles stared at the words for a long moment, then set the paper down without speaking. The silence was worse than anger. A revised note, meaning an updated written instruction sent to banquet staff, suggested the queen's orb had been repositioned under the phrase, "enhanced consort visibility." William's expression tightened when he heard it. Catherine listened as Sophie spoke quietly near the doorway. The trusted confidant told the princess that the same phrase had appeared before in smaller seating changes, smaller adjustments, smaller shifts that seemed harmless at the time. Catherine felt the meaning land heavily. Sophie was not shouting. She was not accusing. But her words turned the banquet incident into something larger, as if this night had been built piece by piece. Charles looked again at the note, and the king understood the deeper threat. If a symbol of royal authority could be moved under soft language, then the palace machinery had been tested. If no one stopped it, then someone believed Camilla's circle could push the line and survive the shock. That thought wounded him because it placed the queen consort between personal loyalty and royal control. Camilla waited outside that chamber, feeling every second stretch against her. She knew people were speaking about her, and she knew Charles was no longer asking whether she had worn the orb. He was asking who around her had dared to move the crown's authority without his command. With that realization, the banquet's silence turned into fallout, and the first consequence landed on the person least prepared to face it. The palace could survive whispers, it could survive tension, but it could not survive the image of sacred authority being treated like personal decoration. Camilla understood that before anyone said it aloud. When the side door closed behind her, the queen consort was no longer surrounded by music, candles, or guests. She was alone, with the knowledge that one symbol had changed everything. Charles ended the banquet before the final toast. The final toast, the closing speech of honor at a royal meal, was meant to seal the evening with unity and respect. Instead, the king replaced celebration with control. Staff moved quickly. Guests rose in stunned silence. Palace aides understood why the decision mattered. If the moment continued, the image of Camilla with the orb would become the memory of the night. Camilla returned to a private sitting room and removed her gloves slowly. Her face had gone pale, not from anger, but from the public meaning of what had happened. The queen consort knew the banquet halt would not remain a private wound. People had seen Charles stop the room. People had seen the orb taken away. People had seen her standing at the center of it all, exposed. Charles did not follow her at once. That delay hurt Camilla more than any sharp word could have done. The king stayed behind, because the ceremonial objects had to be secured, and staff were ordered to freeze the remaining banquet photographs. A ceremonial object means an item used in royal events to represent power, history, or duty. Those objects mattered because they told the world the monarchy still knew its own limits. William received the confirmation quietly. The revised note had bypassed one traditional approval step, meaning one expected layer of palace permission had been skipped before the banquet instructions reached staff. The prince understood what that meant. Confusion could be forgiven. A skipped approval could not. He looked toward Catherine, and the princess knew at once that his silence carried more anger than any speech. Catherine advised William not to speak publicly yet. She reminded him that one careless word could deepen the fracture before Charles made his decision. The prince listened, but his jaw stayed tight. He knew the monarchy had already been shaken. He also knew the future would judge how firmly his father answered this moment. Camilla waited alone, hearing only the weight of what had been lost. She had wanted recognition, but now recognition had become humiliation. Then the door opened. Charles entered the room where she sat, and this time there were no guests, no aides, and no symbols left to hide behind. The monarchy had watched the banquet collapse, but the true turning point came only when Charles and Camilla were finally left alone. No announcement could match the force of that private room. Charles entered without ceremony. Camilla did not rise at first. For the first time that night, the conflict was stripped of jewels, titles, and witnesses. It was only a man, a woman, and a crown that had become heavier than both of them. What followed changed the emotional direction of the entire crisis. Charles closed the door and let the silence speak first. The Queen's orb had already been secured away from the banquet, but its absence made the room feel colder, not calmer. The orb, a sacred royal object that stands for the monarch's authority, no longer sat between them physically, yet emotionally it was still there. The king knew why that mattered. If the symbol could be pulled into personal struggle, then the monarchy itself could be pulled with it. Camilla looked at him and finally said what she had held back all night. She had wanted recognition, not rebellion. The queen consort's voice was lower now, stripped of pride, and Charles heard the pain inside it. But he answered with the hard truth she feared. Recognition could not come by touching what belonged to the crown. He was not trying to crush her. He was trying to protect something older than both of them. Camilla's voice broke, and for one brief second, Charles softened. The king looked less like a ruler and more like a man wounded by the cost of his own duty. He understood her hunger to be accepted. He understood how long she had lived under judgment. But the monarchy had been tested in front of guests, courtiers, and family, and he could not pretend the test had not happened. Then Charles made the decision that changed everything. The halted banquet would stand in the official record. The official record, meaning the palace's formal written account of major royal events, would not hide the pause or soften the reason behind it. Camilla stared at him when he said it. The queen consort understood the meaning at once. The night would not be buried as a misunderstanding. It would remain as a warning. Camilla slowly removed the last ceremonial pin from her gown and placed it on the table. The gesture said what her voice could not. She accepted there were limits she could not cross, even as the acceptance wounded her. Charles watched her do it, and the king did not look victorious. He looked tired, almost broken, because duty had demanded pain from both of them. Charles left the room with the decision made. Before the door closed, he asked for William. That request changed the weight of the night again. Camilla remained behind, knowing the matter had moved beyond embarrassment. The monarch was no longer only dealing with hurt. He was preparing to restore order. The private pain had reached its decision, and now the outside world was about to see the monarchy explain a silence that had already become impossible to contain. By morning, the banquet was no longer a palace secret. The halted toast, the missing final photograph, and the sudden royal exit became the story Britain could not stop watching. One image captured the mood. Crowds gathered outside Buckingham Palace, staring through the gates. As broadcasters repeated the same phrase again and again, the king stopped the banquet. Charles knew silence would not protect the monarchy now. Palace communications issued a short statement saying the coronation banquet had ended early due to a ceremonial irregularity. Palace communications means the official team that speaks for the royal household when a major event needs explaining. The phrase was meant to control panic, but it did the opposite. It confirmed something serious had happened, without giving the public enough to stop asking questions. Camilla watched the morning coverage without speaking. The queen consort's face tightened when a broadcaster called the queen's orb the symbol that stopped the room. The orb, the sacred object tied to royal authority, had become bigger than her pain. It now stood for a question the whole country could understand. Had a royal symbol been used for personal power, or had one woman simply reached too far in her hunger to belong? Charles watched the same coverage separately, saddened but steady. The king understood the public embarrassment was the price of protecting royal meaning. If he had allowed the banquet to continue, the image might have looked like approval. If he had hidden the truth, the monarchy would have looked weak. The monarch had chosen damage in public over decay in private, and that choice carried a cost. Then the front pages arrived. One newspaper showed a dark banquet table beneath the headline, "The Orb That Halted the Crown." That single image turned the incident into a national symbol. It was no longer only about Camilla. It was about what belonged to the crown, what belonged to marriage, and what no royal figure had the right to blur. Outside Buckingham Palace, the crowd grew heavier. Buckingham Palace, the monarch's main working residence, became the place where public feeling gathered and hardened. One elderly woman was quoted saying, "Some things belong to the crown, not to any one person." The line spread quickly, because it sounded simple, but it carried the whole wound of the night. Camilla heard those words later, and they struck deeper than any official punishment. Charles heard them too, and the king understood public feeling had moved beyond gossip. People were judging the meaning of the act itself. The palace had answered, the world had reacted, and now only one thing remained, the final meaning of what Charles chose to defend. In the end, the halted banquet was not just about Camilla wearing the queen's orb. It was about the line between personal desire and royal duty. Charles made that line visible to everyone. He paid for it emotionally. Camilla felt it publicly. William understood it clearly. and Catherine watched a painful truth settle over the monarchy. The crown survives only when its symbols remain greater than the people who wear them. Charles made the final decision with a heavy heart. Sacred ceremonial objects would remain under direct sovereign approval, meaning only the monarch could give final permission for the most important royal symbols to be used, moved, or displayed. That mattered because the Queen's orb had nearly turned one private hunger for recognition into a public crisis of authority. The king closed that path before it could ever open again. Camilla accepted the decision with visible restraint. The queen consort did not fight it, because she knew resistance would only deepen the wound. Her humiliation had already been seen, discussed, and judged. If she pushed further, she would not look wronged. She would look reckless. So she carried the pain quietly, knowing that acceptance had limits, and those limits had now been drawn in front of the entire royal world. Charles carried sadness beneath his authority. The king had defended the crown, but he had also hurt someone close to him, in front of the institution they both served. That was the cruel cost of monarchy. Love could soften a private room, but it could not rewrite public duty. He understood that the banquet halt would follow Camilla for years, and yet he also understood that silence would have followed him forever. William privately supported the decision. The prince told Catherine that the monarchy could survive tension, but it could not survive confusion over who held sacred authority. Catherine listened carefully, and the princess knew he was right. The family could argue behind doors. They could suffer, forgive, and repair. But the symbols of the crown had to remain untouched by personal ambition, because those symbols carried the trust of generations. Catherine also recognized that the moment had changed the family's future. Every royal now understood that comfort would never come before duty again. Every aide understood that soft wording could no longer move hard power. Every guest who watched that banquet stop understood the message Charles had sent without raising his voice. The monarchy had been bruised, but not broken. The final verdict was clear. Charles stopped the banquet because he chose the crown over silence, protocol over convenience, and duty over personal softness. Camilla lost the illusion that acceptance meant unlimited authority. The king proved his reign would not bend when sacred symbols were crossed. The queen's orb returned to its rightful place, and with it, royal order returned too. There was no unfinished question left in that room, only the echo of a glass being set down, only the memory of a banquet being stopped, only the image of a monarch reminding everyone, even those closest to him, that the crown still comes first. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.